What is LINQ in C#? Today we're going to go over all the important LINQ methods, or at least the ones you would use on a day-to-day basis. We're going to first kind of start off with what is LINQ, what it's used for, what it helps with, and then the back half of this video is going to be all the code, me going through, all the LINQ methods, showing you guys how they work and how they are used. So first of all, let's start with what is LINQ. LINQ stands for Language Integrated Queries. It provides a consistent query experience for an object, whether that's linked to objects, linked to a relational database, as well as linked to XML. LINQ queries return results as objects, so you don't really have to worry about having to transform them into objects later. It's already set. LINQ allows for less code to be written, as well as in many scenarios, it allows you to not have to write loops or have to traverse collections or perform actions on them, cutting down the code. So advantages of LINQ are that the query language is uniform for all data sources, as well as the same syntax can query multiple data sources. You, again, like I just mentioned, are writing less code, and it makes it more readable and easy to understand and maintain. LINQ can be used with enumerables or queryable classes. This is going to include lists, dictionaries, queues, sets, etc., as well as LINQ to SQL, an entity framework, and much more. And we'll be going over examples later of a lot of the different methods and really the most important ones and the ones that I actually kind of want you guys to know about. LINQ queries can be written in the query syntax, which kind of looks a lot like SQL. I'll be throwing up the images so you guys can kind of just get a brief glimpse of it so you guys can tell the difference. Or the method syntax, but it is up to you to which one you like. My current job actually makes me write in the query syntax, even though I 100% prefer the method. To me, it just makes a lot more sense, but some people might like the query syntax a lot, especially if they come from a SQL background. The query syntax starts from a from and ends with the select keyword. I will be doing all my examples in the method format with kind of method chaining, as it's called, but just know that they can all be translated between each other as long as you understand the logic behind them. I just personally think the query syntax takes longer to write, but that's just me. And again, like in SQL, you can chain the clauses together, like you can have multiple filters of any kind and do more complicated queries as you put all these different types of clauses together. And another thing I need to talk about really quick is deferred execution versus immediate execution within LINQ. This is an interesting way which you can kind of build your queries. I've used it in the past when I was building kind of a search feature, and depending on checkboxes that the user would select, I would set certain conditions or flags on the back end, and then I would build my query slowly without it executing. So I wasn't going with every flag to the database. I was able to kind of build my query, and I'll show you guys later an example of that. And then once you finally call a for loop or a to list, once you actually need to iterate over that object is when actually the query is executed. So you're not going to the database 10 times as you're building this query. You're just going that one time once you actually need the object because you're going to perform some action on it. But now that we've gone into what it is, let's show examples with as many of the LINQ functions as possible. LINQ is also a common thing to be asked about in good technical interviews, because we know there's a lot of bad technical interviews, but a good kind of back-end interview that you could have is to do a lot of these LINQ questions. So this is kind of good stuff to know. And all the code will be on my GitHub, and the link to that will be below. And if you find this video useful, I'd love it if you guys hit the like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of this content. So now onto the code, where I'll be showing you guys how to use each of the query operators. All right, guys, so now I've created just a small blank console project, nothing crazy, and we're going to dive into all the important methods that come with using LINQ, and we're going to go over all those clauses. I did leave a few out, but I'm really just focusing on the ones that I think are the most important and that I've used a lot or consistently that I think would be more valuable. And I'm going to go over kind of what they're used, what they do, and if there's any like little tricks or differences between them. So let's dive into that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a list in here. This is just going to be a simple list that we're going to use for a few of these. We're going to have an item class, which I do need to create. Let me just pull that in very quickly to have. So we're going to just have a public class called item. I'm just going to move it all the way to the bottom. I don't feel like making another file, so we're just going to keep it at the bottom. It's just going to have an ID, a name, and a color. Very simple class, and we're just going to try and use this list for as many of these as possible. And if we need to create more lists for kind of more focused clauses, we can at that point. So let's begin with the very first one, and this is probably the one that almost everyone that's ever used LINQ uses consistently, and that is going to be the where clause. So what are we doing with the where clause? So the where clause is essentially just a condition that we're putting. So when we're going to the item list, we're basically saying, where is color equal blue? Kind of the first, I'm going to explain more in depth later, but for now, you guys just need to know that this just means get the first instance that we find in the list, which is going to be right here, which is the little ball that is blue. So item list, where is the color blue and where is it the first instance of it? It's going to be right here. So let's show you guys that in action. So right here, I'm just going to print out the where clause, just text, and then we're going to know that the value is going to be right here. So if we look at the result, it's just going to say little ball because that is the first instance that we see right here. And if you wanted to, you could go ahead and like chain it. You could put like another where, or you could do like an or statement here or an and statement. Like the possibilities that you have here are really endless. You can put as many conditions as you want to filter out. And again, like I'm going to say with all of these methods that I'm going to show you, a lot of them can be combined if they logically, make sense. So as long as they logically make sense, then you should be able to combine a lot of these and you're not just stuck with only a where. You can do a where and then some of the future methods that we're going to talk about. The next one we're going to talk about is going to be the OrderBy clause. With the OrderBy clause, you're basically saying you're going to pick kind of a property or something within an object that you have, or the object list, and you're going to say, by that property, I want you to organize this list. Whatever that property may be, that's how we're going to organize this list. So let's see that in action. So what do we have here? We have the item list, and we're going to order by the name. So this one, though, doesn't say it, but it's actually doing it in ascending order. It says it actually in here in the description, but not in the method name. Why do I bring this up? Because there is another method called order by descending, and this is obviously the opposite of this. So this one's going to be the ascending way, descending, and then obviously depending on what parameter you put here, it's going to sort the list in that various way, and it's going to give you kind of that. And now let's show that by printing out the results. So now in the results, we can kind of see that we have this order by clause. We can see that we kind of sorted by name here. So when we sorted by name, it kind of went B all the way down to S. As you know, ascending, obviously the greater letter is at the bottom, S. And then descending, we did the IDs. So as we can see, this second list went 6, 5, all the way down to 1. So order by descending, order by ascending, or just order by. The next clause we're actually going to talk about is going to be the GroupBy clause. This is basically going to say we have our list and we're going to select the property and then we're going to group by that. So they're going to be all kind of clustered up together. It's basically going to assign a key to kind of nest a list inside of a list. You're going to see what I say when I show you guys the example, but basically it groups them into bunches. So it'll be like, okay, so ID 1 is here. All of them that had, I don't know, ID is a bad example. It should be like maybe color blue. All the ones that color blue go here. All the ones that color brown go here. And then it kind of builds the list that way. You guys will make sense once I show you this example. Let's get the example in here so I can explain. So in our item list, we're going to group by color. So our color is going to be here. So we're going to have green, brown. Obviously, all of these are going to be by themselves except for blue. Blue has 2 options. So blue is going to put inside of them these 2. So we're going to see it. So basically what I'm doing here is we're going to group by the clause. So as you can see, we have to loop through kind of the key array or the key list, which is this right here. But then inside of it, it also has a secondary list that's going to show you the item name. So we're going to see kind of how they are together in the results. So we can see if we scroll back now. So now that it printed out and it ran, if I scroll back up here, we're going to see that it's going to green with the ball, brown with the football, white with the baseball, and then yellow with the softball. But then when we get to blue, we see that blue's only here once because it's the key, and then little ball and this blue ball are both inside of blue. They're both in this little list inside of it. So you can see kind of how they're grouped by a key by using this group by. So it just helps you kind of put everything into its little bundle, and you can see if you had like a lot of different categories and you wanted to kind of quickly separate them out and group them together, this would be a good way to do that. The next clause that we're going to talk about is the join clause. This one's a little weird. The syntax is a little different, so I will walk you guys through exactly what each part of this means. I know when I got this one in an actual technical interview, I did have to Google this one because it's really weird, at least in the method chaining format. If you do the query syntax way, it's a little bit more straightforward because it looks like SQL, but when you do it in the kind of the join method format, it's a little different. But let's get into the example that we're going to do here. So we're going to have two lists. They're going to be sort of modified versions of that top list that we have. We're going to have ball and football going to be the same in both lists. And then these bottom two are going to be different. So soccer, tennis on the bottom, baseball, softball. So only the 1 and 2 IDs are the exact same. So these two are going to be the exact same. And now let me show you guys the syntax, and you guys are going to see what I mean when I say the join syntax is a little weird, but I'm going to explain to you guys what each part of these kind of mean so that it makes sense to you guys and you're not as confused as I probably was at one point. Okay, so looking at the join, what happens here is you're going to first select one of your lists. So here I'm selecting item list 1. Then you're going to do .join. And then this first right here is going to be the other list that you're going to join together, that you're going to look for the common rows. Because what join does is it grabs the things that they have in common. It doesn't just grab everything from both tables. It's going to grab, basically here in our example, it's going to grab these first 2 rows. It's going to just grab these. So our new list, when we join them, is going to be these 2 because they're what they have in common. It's going to ignore these 2 and these 2. This second value right here is the primary key that we are trying to bind on. The next one is going to be the foreign key. So that's how we are going to join them. If you guys have done SQL, you know that when you're doing a join, you need to match on keys. So that is what you're doing here. It's just, it looks weird because it's like a lambda expression, but you can basically are allowed to kind of choose whatever your keys are going to be here. And now when we get to this last part, this is where you're basically doing your .select, where you're selecting what you want to grab. So basically here you're just saying from item 1 and item 2, we just kind of want all of them. We just want everything that we wanted. And then, or you can create a different object. You can say, I want to do, new. And you can create an anonymous type if you want to. You could do like, I don't know, ID equals item1.id. And then you could do name equals item2.name. And this would be totally fine to return this as well if you wanted to. But if you just want to return the things that both kind of had in common, you can kind of just return one of these, but you can create like an anonymous object in there. But that is how this works. So I hope that was clear to explain, because it does at first glance look sort of confusing. But now let's look at kind of the example where we are doing this. Looking at our join clause here, we can see that it joined 1 ball green and 2 football brown, which was the 2 top ones that both had in common. And that is the join. Moving right along, we are now at the select clause. So the select clause, I kind of almost showed it to you in the last one, but it basically just allows you to select pieces out of these objects if you want when you query, or you can create a whole new object like I was kind of doing in the last example with the join. So let's see it in action. I'm going to go back to our original list that we had up at the very top, this item list, and I'm going to say where the color is blue, like in our original example, you're going to have these 2. That's going to be the 2 that it wants to try and give back, because we're doing a 2 list, not a first. We're going to get both of those, but I do not want the name. I only want the ID and the color. So this is how you kind of create an anonymous kind of new object out of it, where we're just picking out the item and the color, and we're kind of just forgetting about the name, and we're creating a whole new object from this list. So we're just selecting certain things, and this is what the select does. And again, like you see, like we're chaining it with the where, and that is totally fair, and it's a great example of how to use it. So now let's actually see it work and see the results. So as we can see, we pulled both of those 2, and we pulled 5 and 6 and blue, and we did not take the name because we did not select the name in here. So that is how you select. Now we're going to move on to the all or any clauses. Both of these are going to return bools. The any is going to check, is there any object in this list or anything in this list that matches this condition? If so, return true, or if not, return false. And then the all is going to say, here's a condition. Do all items in this list fit this condition? Return true or false. So now let's see them in action. So we have our all any clause, and then here are going to be 3 examples that I'm going to have. So for my item list, I'm going to say, are any of them the color equals blue? So this is going to return true, as we know that these 2 have the color blue. And then this item list, are any of them pink? Well, none of them have pink here, so we clearly know that this is going to be false. And then now we're going to say, do all of them have the name baseball? No, there's baseball's only in here once, so this is also going to throw false because none of these have the same name or the same color or the same ID. So regardless of what we pick, none of these are going to give that value. And if anything, I know I use any before, kind of in professional projects. I've never really used all, but I still felt it was valuable enough to show in this tutorial because it was very simple to show. But now let's kind of go through the results and let's prove to you that what I just said is correct. So we go to the all and any clause. So this should be true. It's true because there was something that had blue as its color, and then false, nothing had pink. And then are all baseball for the name? False, because only one of them had it, not all of them. And now let's move on to the next one, which is going to be contains. Now we're at the contains clause. This is also going to be something that returns a bool. It kind of checks in this list, is there an object here that contains this? Does it contain this? And contains does not work with objects. It only works with like types. If you wanted to do like, does this object contain age 20 and also name Bill, you would have to build a helper method that extends this to be able to check it. So you wouldn't be using LINQ at that point. You would be like extending the functionality. But if you wanted to just use on your list, does it contain this? You can only kind of use it on data type, like single data types. You can't use it on objects. So for our example, I have this integer list right here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are going to first check does this list contain 8, which of course is going to return false. And does this list contain 1? This is going to return true. Very simple, straightforward. Let's see the answer. As we see in the contains clause, contains 8, false, contains 1, true. And obviously, these can be, like I've said earlier, chained to whatever you want. And usually a lot of these times, this contained or .any are used as conditions to check for something before you perform an action on a list. The next clauses we're going to jump into are going to be all the math related ones, all the ones that calculate something. So let's dive into all of those. So with those, we're going to have the math clauses, which are going to be the average, the count, the max, sum, and min. So let's see all of them in action. They're extremely straightforward if you kind of understand math, I guess. So obviously the average is going to take a sum of numbers. And I'm still using the same list from up here. So it's going to take the sum of numbers and then divide it by, the size of this. Max is going to get the biggest number. Min is going to get the smallest number. Count is going to get the amount of entries in here. So I'm actually pointing at item list. So it'll count that there is 6 items in here and it'll give me back 6. And then the sum is going to add them all up and then give me that number. But you can use these on objects. I don't really have an example here, but let's say I wanted to add up the ages or wanted to add up the IDs. I could actually do that right here. So let's say I wanted to do, you can do item list.sum of the IDs. And then that would pick out this would sum these numbers up. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when it comes to like IDs, but let's say you had an age or you had money, like some type of dollar values that you wanted to add up. Or something else that you want to do. That's how you can kind of access variables or properties within an object. So that is kind of how you can do that. And that is, again, also totally valid. But now let's check kind of the simple ones that we had. We can see that right here, the average is 3. The max is going to be 5. The min is going to be 1. The count is 6 because we did it of this original object here at the top. And then the sum is going to be 15 because you added 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. And now let's move on to the next thing. These are going to be the ElementAt first, last, and single. And we're going to talk about defaults. So these are going to be these that I just mentioned. So the ElementAt is basically going to be what is the element or what is the object at a certain index. First is how we talked about at the beginning, where it's going to give me the first value that matches a certain condition. Last is going to give me the last value that matches a certain condition. Single is different than first. Single wants to give me the value if there's only one match. And I'm gonna make the distinction when I actually have the values here, just to make it very clear. And then the defaults, we're also going to discuss those as well. So in our examples, we are going to have these. So we are again going to go back to our item list. So our item list is refresher, is this top list that we've been using the whole time. When it comes to ElementAt, you're just passing in an index. So we're just going to get basically item 0, and we're just returning that. Nothing crazy here. And then when it comes to first, so the difference between using first and using single. So if I use single here, not first, the difference between first and single is that single will throw an exception, like I said in this comment here, if there's more than one match. So let's say there was two brown, I say blue. So if I put blue and I say I want single, it will throw an error because there's two matches. It won't just give me one. First will give me just the first one, or dot last will give me the last one. But single will throw an error because it's not just a singular value that we have that matches. We have more than that. So that is the difference between first and single. So don't get that confused. And then let's say that nothing matched. Well, first, last, and single would all throw, they would throw exceptions that nothing was found. So to cover this, you would actually use first or default, or last or default, or single or default. So what the or defaults do is it basically says, did we find anything? So instead of your production app or whatever throwing an exception and kind of stopping the application and breaking it, you just want it to return null. So default will say, did we get anything? No? Okay, let's just pass in a null. And then at that point, it's your job as a developer to assess that null and take the appropriate action. So that's kind of how you just cover that. And I think in general, I always use first or default and then kind of cover the nulls than just using first, because I'd rather have that protection and not crash the application if I kind of don't take that, into case or whatever, if I don't check that. And now let's check the examples for this or the results. So the first element was ball. The first result that matched blue was little ball. And then the dot last, which was the last matching condition, is going to be this blue ball. And then the single result was football, because there was not anything else to add brown. But like I said, if I had changed maybe this to brown, then it would have thrown an exception because there was more than just a single result. The next clause I want to talk about is the Concat Clause, or the concatenation clause. This basically just merges two lists of the same type. So our example is going to be just quick and simple here. We're going to have two lists. So we're going to have a list of integers and a list of integers. And how do we concatenate them? Extremely easily. All you have to do is you're going to do your one list, concat, pass in the second list, say it's to a list, and boom, you're going to have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 list. Very simple, straightforward. I'm not going to beat around the bush too much. This is very easy. As you can see, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is all you have to do to concatenate. Now we're going to move into the distinct clause. This is going to be for pulling in only distinct values. So you're basically filtering out repeat values with the distinct. So like I was saying with distinct, it's going to get distinct values of a list. This also does not work with objects. So if you would want to check for and filter out for distinct values, you would also have to make a helper method for that. But for now, we're just going to see it with the basic data types. So we are also going to use just an integer list here. As you can see, I have repeat ones, repeat threes, and we're going to do a distinct on that list, and we're going to say .toList, and we're going to see that we're only going to have 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 5 when we actually run this. So as we can see, the distinct clause here, we're going to have a 1, 2, 3, and 5. So it filtered out the double ones, and it filtered out the triple threes. And now we just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's what distinct is. The next two that we're going to talk about are going to be skip and take clauses. These two are basically, you're going to say, I want to skip a certain amount of values in this list, and then I want everything else. or I want to take only a certain amount of items from this list. So let's see our examples here. We're going to go back to the original item list that we have, this one that we've been using for everything that has 6 items. So what we're saying here is we're basically going to say we want to skip the first 2 items. So we want not items 1 and 2, we want 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then in this taken list, we want to say we only want the first 3. So sometimes these kind of skip or takes can be used when doing pagination queries. You would just do a multiplication to then calculate the page that you need to get to. So you would take just like that next 10 because you're only showing 10 in the table or something of that nature. So these are sometimes used, at least the last time I used them, I was using them for pagination. But now let's kind of see the example. I just kind of wanted to mention kind of like the real world example for me of actually using these in a project. And as you can see for skipping, we skipped and then we're at baseball through the blue ball because we skipped the first 2. And then we took the first 3, which was ball, football, and baseball. Okay, so now the final thing that I wanted to talk about, deferred execution versus immediate execution. This was something I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but now I want to show you guys kind of the code version of this. So this was the example that I just moved down here. So this was the item skip to list. So this to list makes this immediate execution because we're immediately telling it we need this object and we want to immediately perform some action. And to make it a list, you need to actually act on the objects. So we need it, so it's executing now. This would mean that we're going to the list, and then let's say I want to do this again, I would have to make another query at that point. But deferred execution is how you can build a query without necessarily always having to actually get to the objects. So an example here is going to be where we go to our original item list and we're going to say where color equals blue. That is 2 items. 2 items. And then we're going to do a query. We are not going to act on it. We're not looping on it. We're not calling to list. We're not doing anything. We're just building a query. So as you can see right here, when we run it, this is not an actual, it's not giving me a result. When I click results view, this acts as like I'm enumerating. So that would actually give me the values, but we're not, we're building a query. And now onto the query, I'm also appending .select. I only want the IDs here. I want nothing else. I only want the IDs. And we're just adding to that. So we're just clicking on that. Clicking on, now it's a where select. And then the next part is going to be, now we're actually at toList. So this is where it actually executes. So you can see as like if you had, like I was mentioning earlier, a checklist or a bunch of conditions, you could consider like concatenating and applying and chaining more methods to build a longer query so that you only have to go to the database one time and you have all your conditions set. And that's kind of how you could do like a search, or you could do other different things. In my example, it was a search for an application. But this is how you can kind of do it without having to consistently go to the database for every single little thing. And then as you can see in the deferred, we just get 5 and 6 because those were the 2 things that we kind of wanted. And with that, those are all the methods in LINQ that I really wanted to show you guys. I hope they kind of sank in and they were good. And like I said earlier, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it useful, please drop a like and please subscribe. And if you guys want to move along and continue with your C# progression and you want to create a full API, check out this video right here to do a full .NET 6 CRUD API.